53 years since the last boot print. We put 12 men on the moon, then ghosted it completely. When Elon Musk launched SpaceX, he didn't just build rockets. He exposed the dirty secret NASA buried for decades. It wasn't aliens. It wasn't danger. It was something worse. Political sabotage. Every president killed the last one's moon program. $20 billion burned. Apollo's budget was slashed from 4% to 0.36%. The Constellation program? Canceled. The asteroid mission? Scrapped. Now Musk's screaming what astronauts whisper. We're still in the horse and buggy days because politicians won't stop the cycle. Let's dive right in. Here's what they don't tell you in history class. Apollo wasn't canceled because we ran out of ideas. It was murdered by a spreadsheet. In 1965, NASA commanded 4% of the entire federal budget. Think about that. 4 cents of every tax dollar went to putting humans on another world. By 1972, that number had been slashed so brutally that Apollo 17 commander Eugene Cernan knew his footsteps would be the last for decades. As he climbed back into the lunar module, his words weren't celebratory, they were a eulogy. We leave as we came, and God willing, as we shall return. He believed it wouldn't be long. He was catastrophically wrong. What happened next exposes the real villain in this story. President Kennedy promised the moon by decade's end, and NASA delivered with surgical precision in 1969. Mission accomplished, box checked, photo op complete. But once Neil Armstrong planted that flag, the political incentive evaporated overnight. The moon landing was never really about science. It was a Cold War statement, a geopolitical message to the Soviet Union. Once that message was sent, Congress asked the uncomfortable question, why are we still paying for this? The original estimate for Apollo was $7 billion. The final bill? Over $20 billion. And when the space race trophy was secured, that price tag suddenly looked indefensible. 20 Apollo missions were planned. Only 17 flew. The last 3 were canceled before hardware even left the factory. The budget cuts were just the opening act. What came next created a pattern so destructive that even NASA's own astronauts started breaking their silence. Here's the core problem. Building a spacecraft capable of deep space missions takes at least a decade, sometimes 15 years. But American presidents serve 4-year terms. You see where this is going? By the time you're halfway through development, a new administration walks in, looks at the previous guy's project, and kills it to make room for their own legacy. The numbers don't lie. In 2004, President George W. Bush launched the Constellation program, a massive initiative to replace the aging space shuttle and return humans to the moon. NASA designed the Ares rocket and poured $9 billion into the Orion crew vehicle over 5 years. Engineers worked around the clock. Prototypes were tested. The vision was tangible. Then President Obama took office. After a Government Accountability Office report flagged budget concerns, he canceled Constellation entirely. $9 billion. 5 years of work? Gone. The new priority became the Space Launch System, with completely different architecture and timelines. When President Trump entered office, he didn't cancel SLS, but he scrapped Obama's asteroid mission and pivoted back to lunar exploration with the Artemis program. New goals, new schedules, new budgets. Scott Kelly, the astronaut who spent an entire year aboard the International Space Station, captured the frustration perfectly. I would like the next president to support a budget that allows us to accomplish the mission we are asked to perform, whatever that mission may be. Translation? We don't even care what the mission is anymore. Just pick something and stick with it long enough to finish. Independent estimates suggest this political whiplash has burned through $20 billion in wasted development costs alone. That's an entire Apollo program's worth of funding, vaporized not because of engineering failures, but because politicians treat NASA like a campaign talking point. This is the context Elon Musk walked into and why his criticisms hit so hard. Retired astronaut Jeffrey Hoffman called Musk part of a generation of billionaires who are space nuts. But that description misses the bigger picture. SpaceX didn't just build reusable rockets. It exposed how bloated and politically paralyzed the traditional space industry had become. While NASA cycled through budget battles and political redesigns, Musk landed rocket boosters on autonomous drone ships in the Atlantic. When those boosters touched down, his entire team erupted, screaming, jumping, celebrating like they just won a championship. Compare that to the stiff formality of traditional aerospace press conferences. Astronaut Rusty Schweickart explained why this matters. What's important about spaceflight is that it sparks the flame in young people. Excitement comes when you've got teenagers and 20-year-olds running programs. That energy defined Apollo. The average age of NASA engineers during the moon landing was 28. These weren't gray-haired bureaucrats. They were young people given impossible challenges and trusted to solve them. That culture died when Apollo ended, replaced by layers of contractors, subcontractors, and congressional oversight committees. Musk has been relentless in pointing this out. He stated publicly that SpaceX's Starship system could make lunar missions affordable and routine, potentially enabling permanent human presence on the moon. But more importantly, he's called out what NASA astronauts can only whisper. The system is designed to move slowly because slow means more billable hours for contractors. The cost-plus contracting model NASA uses pays contractors based on expenses, plus a guaranteed profit margin. There's no penalty for delays or budget overruns. In fact, they're profitable. SpaceX operates on fixed-price contracts, deliver the product or don't get paid. That's why Starship development has advanced faster than NASA's Space Launch System, despite being a more ambitious vehicle. This isn't just about rockets. It's about a half-century of institutional failure that Musk dragged into the spotlight by simply building what NASA said would take decades. Which brings us to right now to Artemis and to a question worth asking. Can NASA actually pull this off? The signs are surprisingly good. On September 23, 2024, mission managers announced that Artemis II, the first crewed lunar flight in over 50 years, could launch as early as February 5, 2026. Not a landing yet, but a critical test. 4 astronauts will fly aboard NASA's Space Launch System rocket inside the Orion spacecraft, loop around the moon, and return to Earth. The crew is set. Commander Reed Wiseman will lead, with Victor Glover as pilot. Mission specialists Christina Koch and Canada's Jeremy Hansen round out the team, marking genuine international collaboration. If they launch on schedule, it'll be a nighttime liftoff visible for hundreds of miles. But let's acknowledge the reality. Artemis II was originally supposed to fly in 2024. It was delayed because the Artemis I uncrewed test mission in late 2022 revealed unexpected problems. The Orion heat shield experienced significantly more charring during re-entry than simulations predicted. That's the kind of issue you don't gamble with when humans are inside. Engineers spent 2 years analyzing the heat shield, running tests, implementing fixes. The Space Launch System rocket is nearly complete inside Kennedy Space Center's Vehicle Assembly Building right now. The solid rocket boosters are attached. In the coming weeks, Orion will be integrated. NASA expects to roll out the fully stacked rocket in October. This is real hardware, real progress. But it's also fragile progress, dependent on continued political will and sustained funding. Here's where the conversation gets uncomfortable, because the numbers tell a story NASA's public relations team doesn't advertise. Today, NASA receives roughly 0.36% of the total federal budget, around $25 billion annually. During Apollo's peak, that number was 4%. That's not a budget cut. That's demolition. And that 0.36% has to cover everything. The James Webb Space Telescope, Mars rovers, the Space Launch System, climate satellites, missions to Jupiter and Saturn, solar research, Earth science, and returning humans to the moon. Walter Cunningham, Apollo 7 astronaut, testified before Congress in 2015 and said plainly, NASA is being asked to do exponentially more with a fraction of historic resources, while mission priorities get rewritten every election cycle. The Artemis program alone is projected to cost nearly $93 billion through 2025, with estimates climbing past $100 billion through the 2020s. That's spread across rocket development, spacecraft, ground systems, and the planned Gateway lunar station. For context, the entire Apollo program cost about $280 billion in today's dollars, but that was concentrated over 8 years with singular focus. Artemis is being built in an environment of constant resource competition and political uncertainty. Every budget year is a battle. Every administration change is a potential reset. This is exactly what Musk has been criticizing. The system isn't designed for efficiency, it's designed for political survival. Projects get stretched over decades to distribute jobs across as many congressional districts as possible. Contracts favor established aerospace giants with lobbying power. Innovation takes a back seat to job preservation. SpaceX's Starship program, by comparison, is funded privately. Musk answers to investors and physics, not appropriations committees. That freedom allows rapid iteration, aggressive timelines, and actual risk-taking, the exact approach that made Apollo successful. But here's the critical shift that gives Artemis a fighting chance. NASA isn't doing this alone anymore. Private companies aren't waiting for government permission. SpaceX is building Starship with or without NASA contracts. Blue Origin is developing lunar landers independently. International partners, Canada, the European Space Agency, Japan, have committed billions in personnel to Artemis. That makes it much harder for a future president to unilaterally cancel the program without diplomatic consequences. More importantly, the goal has fundamentally changed. Apollo was about planting a flag and coming home. Artemis is about infrastructure. NASA is planning the Gateway Lunar Station, surface habitats, rovers, resource extraction systems. The moon isn't the destination anymore. It's the proving ground for Mars. Astronaut Jeffrey Hoffman stated it clearly. If we're going to go farther, especially beyond the moon, we need new transportation. That transportation is finally being built, and critically, it's not entirely dependent on NASA's budget cycles. Musk has made his position clear. Starship will fly to the moon whether NASA is aboard or not. That competitive pressure might be the only thing keeping traditional aerospace honest and Artemis on schedule. The cultural shift matters too. SpaceX live streams every launch, every landing attempt, every explosion. Millions watch in real time. When Starship prototypes exploded during testing, Musk's response was to build more and test faster. That transparency and urgency resonates with a generation that watched the space shuttle program end without replacement for nearly a decade. So what did humanity actually lose during this half-century of stagnation? An entire generation of aerospace engineers who never got to work on human deep space missions. Students who watched the Challenger and Columbia disasters and decided maybe aerospace wasn't worth the heartbreak. Technologies that could have been developed, refined, made routine. A permanent lunar base that could be operational right now, producing fuel and supporting Mars missions. Eugene Cernan, the last man on the moon, died in January 2017 at age 82. He spent 45 years waiting for someone to follow his footsteps. That wait outlived him. And here's the brutal truth. We didn't lose the technical ability to return. The Saturn V blueprints exist. We understand propulsion, life support, and navigation better than the Apollo engineers did. What we lost was institutional commitment, political courage to fund projects beyond election cycles, and the cultural belief that space exploration matters enough to prioritize. Musk didn't just build rockets. He rebuilt that belief, forced an entire industry to confront its failures, and proved that the impossible timelines were only impossible within NASA's bureaucratic constraints. When SpaceX lands boosters that traditional aerospace said couldn't be done economically, when Starship undergoes rapid testing cycles that would take NASA years to approve, it exposes how much time we wasted. Not because the engineers weren't capable, they were and are brilliant, but because the system they worked within was designed to move slowly. The question now isn't whether we can return to the moon. It's whether we'll stay focused long enough to make it permanent, to build the infrastructure that makes Mars achievable, to finally treat space as a frontier rather than a photo opportunity. Artemis II launching in 2026 would mark 54 years since Eugene Cernan's departure. That's not just a gap in human spaceflight. That's a generational failure we're finally, possibly, beginning to correct. This is exactly why Musk's criticism hits so hard. We didn't lack the technology to return to the moon. We lacked the courage to stop the political sabotage. $20 billion burned on canceled programs. 53 years wasted. But here's what changes everything. Private space companies just broke NASA's dependency on political cycles. SpaceX isn't waiting for congressional approval. Blue Origin isn't asking permission. They're building the rockets, testing them, and forcing the entire industry to keep up or get left behind. That competition might be the only thing that saves Artemis from becoming another canceled dream. Artemis 2 launches February 2026. 4 astronauts loop around the moon. Then Artemis 3 in 2027, the actual landing. If those missions succeed, we're not just visiting the moon. We're building Gateway Station, surface habitats, fuel production. This is the infrastructure for Mars. Musk says Starship will be landing on the moon within this decade regardless. We're about to find out if 50 years of failure taught us anything. So here's my question for you. Do you think Artemis will actually happen on schedule, or are we one election away from another reset? Drop your prediction in the comments. I want to know if you're betting on NASA or on Musk to get there first. If this breakdown gave you a different perspective on why we abandoned the moon, hit that like button. Subscribe to Space Hub for deep dives into the real stories behind space exploration. The engineering, the politics, the breakthroughs the mainstream misses. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next, because Artemis 2 is less than 2 years away and things are moving fast. 53 years is long enough. Time to see if we've finally learned our lesson. NASA just rewrote their entire space station plan because of one private company. Vast completed Haven 1 structure last week, and it's launching May 2026. Not a concept, not a render. Real hardware with Starlink internet, a 4-person crew, and a 30-day mission that matches exactly what NASA now needs. The timeline? It forced NASA to